Test. Good? Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. It's about time. First of all, just a big thank you to Circle CityCon for having us all here. I got to peek behind the scenes a little bit and see how much actually goes into this, and it's quite a bit what these guys are doing. So if you see them around, just be sure to say thank you. I had no idea kind of what all they do, but it's quite a bit what they have going on, so that's pretty awesome. Who am I? I'm a threat researcher for FIDELIS Cybersecurity. I'm working on a doctorate in computer science. I'm a SANS lethal forensicator. Spelling is really important on that one. I just get it wrong. Also some certifications. Always learning new things. There's always so much to learn with this stuff. And then all views expressed here are my own. A little bit about this talk. Why do we want to analyze malware? Is it for the fun of it? It is kind of fun when you're messing around with it. Because you like pain. It's definitely painful when you get something that's really obfuscated. Or to create indicators and better understand attacks. Or Hakuna Matata. So, pretty obvious. It's easy. It's Sunday. Everybody's had a long week. So, that's the reason. Answers always see a multiple choice questions, but in this one I think any of them could be. So what is malware armor? Bad guys, they don't want us to understand what they're doing. So the different techniques, we have anti-virtualization, anti-debugging, anti-disassembly, obfuscation, and packers. Those are some of the things we're going to be going over here. We're also going to give kind of just a little primer to kind of jump into malware analysis, how to dive in. There's two main parts, dynamic and static analysis. And so just starting off with dynamic analysis, what is it? You're basically just, as simply as put, you're watching what it does, but safely. So doing it on another machine. Just the other day there was a VMware escape, so that can happen. So having a separate machine, using VMs with snapshots. Also there's sandboxes. If you want to try one online, you guys get some sort of phishing email sometime. Check out malware.com or hybrid analysis. Those are really cool. And then also there's some bare metal solutions, so that's going to bypass some of the anti-virtualization things that we're going to be talking about here. And then also roll your own, just having like a victim VM and testing there. Some of the tools, just some simple tools that I like: Process Explorer, Process Monitor, INetSim Wireshark, and then you'll need some sort of debugger and virtualization. So, just real quick, looking at like Process Explorer, this is a screenshot of it. It's really nice. It gives you all the processes. You guys have probably all used this, but this is an example of Stuxnet's running here. So when you're looking at dynamic analysis, you really need to know your Windows processes and everything. So here there's several LSAS processes running, and there should only be one. So that's something, I have a link there, know your processes or die trying. That's super helpful to know that. Just because malware will always try to hide, it'll have like DLL with like three L's, or like another example of multiple LSAS processes that shouldn't be running. It'll try to hide and blend in. Some of the highlights of it, you can check out strings right from there, virus total. There's another tool, Process Hacker. A lot of people like that as well. It has some more features kind of built in that you can work with. Process Monitor, another tool by Mark Rusinovich, super smart guy. Another sysinternals tool. This is basically just going to track all of the file system, registry, processes, all that, and log it. So this example, it's another screenshot from Stuxnet and showing where it's dropping the drivers that it has there. And then also, malware is going to need a network. A lot of times it'll shut down if it doesn't have a network to talk to. So needing like INetSim on a Linux box on another VM to simulate all kinds of services. It simulates all kinds of bunch of different services. And then running Wireshark just to record that. Another thing I've seen a lot lately is a lot of malware will call out to like ICANN has IP or places like that because it wants to see if it's really on the internet and it can connect out. So you can actually change the files that INetSim is serving back to the malware. So you can just put like a public IP address in there or something so it thinks it's getting a public address. So And then also just some of the command line tools I've been playing with kind of recently that are really nice if you're analyzing a lot of different PCAPs at scale. Some cool tools with the merging PCAPs and T-Shark, just displaying the output. And then we need a debugger. Debugger is basically you're setting breakpoints, examining registers, looking at memory. You can see the stack in the bottom right, and then memory underneath in the middle, registers in the top right. And then that's probably really small. I don't know if you guys can see it. Apologize for that. But basically, you're just looking at all the assembly instructions, and you're able to step through different instructions, control the flow of the execution. Say it's going one way, you can force it to take a different path if you want to. Here we have a little video just kind of showing the debugger from Xylitol. I posted about 6 days ago looking at a dark comet config, posting it out of memory. Series opening up Resource Hacker, just to look at the resource, and there's the config. It's obfuscated in there. He's hitting play to start the execution. And he's actually, there's all kinds of plugins for Anti-Debug that you can use. This is one to break on certain APIs. Shows one to break on there. Playing, stepping through. It's a little bit about that API. It's a lot, at least what I'm doing. When you're debugging, you're just constantly hitting, on the F keys. So there you found, I think that was the function that deobfuscates that resource that was shown there. Stepping through, step. And then there's the key register. Step. He's setting a breakpoint there. So then he's following that in the memory dump down below there. And then he's going to change that. That's the hex output. And then he changed it to ASCII. And then he's going to run it. And you can see there it's decoding itself in memory. So you're able to get the configuration for Dark Comet right out of memory right there. That's kind of the main point with that. It goes on a little bit longer. But so real quick, getting on to the other part of analysis, just as a primer, static analysis. That's basically what can we figure out about whatever file we got without running it. So just 3 tools, some of my favorite tools that I like, PStudio, 010 Editor, and then, of course, IDAPRO. So PStudio, somebody gives you guys a file and they think it might be bad. This is always a great first step. I really like this. It'll give you all kinds of information. You can see it'll highlight some indicators that it thinks of things that not a normal process should be doing or executable. And it also will give you virus total results. So this sample I just pulled, it was Dooku2 from there. And then also it'll show you the imported symbols. So that's super handy knowing what certain APIs it's going to use. And then when you're doing malware analysis, looking at MSDN, basically living there, researching different functions and knowing what they do. And then also knowing Windows internals. Once again, Mark Rusinovich. And then there's a SANS paper there. These are all be listed in the references, and I'll put up online as well. Just the paper details a lot of common APIs that malware are going to abuse. So once you do this for a little bit, you'll start recognizing some of the bad ones. And it'll kind of just stick out like, oh, that might be something to look at. So that's kind of what PStudio is doing as well. It's highlighting some of the blacklisted APIs. So also looking at strings, it has an XML file of blacklisted strings to look at. So 010 Editor, templates are greater than reading RFCs. I don't know about you guys, but Reading the RFCs can be a little bit dry, so unless you need to get to sleep, they're nice for reading there. But 0 and 0 has these thing called templates, and it'll like break down like within the actual file that you have, and you're able to look at it from there. All kinds of different templates, just highlighting a few of them there. Kind of interesting there. One of my favorites too is a PDF template. Didier Stevens wrote that, and it's really handy for you to get a bad PDF. You can look through and see the different streams. This one, you're usually looking like a JavaScript one or action code or something to look at. So this is just highlighting one of those that you can see. That might be interesting to look at. Lastly, IDA Pro. It's just a screenshot showing a few calls, get host by name, then a socket. And then IDA Pro has this really awesome feature. It's like the cheat code, Konami code. You guys remember that from back in the day? Up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, start. Pulls up hex arrays. This is the decompiled version of the assembly you guys just saw on the last screen. So that saves tons of time. It's kind of like cheat mode. You just hit F5 is basically that Konami code. But it doesn't look exactly how I think any of us would write C code, like it looks, but it gets close enough to get the idea of what's going on. So now after the primer, we're ready to get into looking at some of the different malware armor types. Apologize about the cat themes. I just started with like a couple, and then I just turned into a theme, so I kind of have a lot of them. So. This is a study by Branco, Barbosa, and Neto. They took all kinds of different samples and presented it at Black Hat a couple years ago from Qualys. And they basically just kind of highlighted the different armoring techniques and how prevalent it was in some of the samples they looked at. So they found that 88% of samples around there had anti-reverse engineering, while only 11% didn't. So the different types of malware armor that they, kind of the distribution of what they found. Anti-VM was kind of the highest there, and then obfuscation, anti-debugging, and then anti-disassembly. So looking at anti-virtualization first, basically malware is trying to detect if it's in a virtualized environment, and then it's going to hide. It's just going to like, nope, I'm not talking. Like it's like the cops coming up. They're like, nope, I'm not saying anything. I'm done. It's becoming less common though because we're all using virtualization so much that you take kind of a gamble if you have anti-virtualization and then there's a host you actually want to infect that's virtualized. So one of the techniques is just detecting some virtualization artifacts. So these are actually just parts of a Yara signature from Alien Vaults, just kind of detailing all the different things that they might try to key in on. Process list, registry, memory, file system for VMware. Any of those artifacts, you can see there we got drivers, services, processes. Another kind of tricky one is looking at virtual MAC address detection. Different hardware manufacturers always have a certain prefix at the beginning for their MAC addresses. You can look that up on several sites. When you get a MAC address, you can see. So these are just some of the prefixes for some of the virtualization products to the NIC. So if it sees that prefix, it thinks it's probably likely being virtualized. So that technique of kind of checking for the artifacts can also be done for a lot of the tools that we use. Debug, Wireshark, Process Monitor, a lot of those. So malware samples are actually checked to see if some of those processes are running and then do something different. This is an example from Emotet. Kaspersky did with anti-virtualization. There's a function here to calculate the hash of a process. It's going through, and then you can see on the bottom there, they correlated some of those hashes with some different processes that are running. This is here, it's looking for some VirtualBox and VMware tools. And then if it detects those processes are running by that hash, it's actually going to call out to some different C2s. So to kind of like trick an analyst, maybe kind of a newer person is looking at it, they don't notice this anti-virtualization, then all of a sudden it starts calling out somewhere else, and they're going to get some fake indicators, and this person's malware is still going to run where they want. So another anti-virtualization technique, red pill, no pill. There's several kind of variants of those. How we counter these is by looking for these special instructions, and then from there, just patching the program kind of. So this is a IDaPro script. IDaPro is really handy. There's IDaPython. It's really easy to bring in some scripting and look at things. So this is just looking for any of those assembly instructions and then highlighting them and then talking about and then kind of outputting it that there's potential anti-virtualization there. How do we bypass this? Kind of just like what we said. You'll just change the program to either knob it out or do a jump to where you want to go, or change the comparison to do the true path that you want instead of going down the false path that they're trying to trick you to go down. Another option is to try to remove VMware tools, harden the VM. There's some projects out there, some sandbox projects to try to really hide Cuckoo and some of the other sandboxes to really make it a lot harder to detect. The other one is, we talked about earlier, bare metal analysis. So actually running it on a real hardware machine because the malware author wants it to run on there. So it has to run there. So then you'll get the best results. There's some good projects out there, Paranoid Fish and Scoopy NG. If you're trying to harden the virtual machine, there's a way to kind of test it from there. So, anti-debugging. This is basically just when you're going to be detecting that you're under control of a debugger or just trying to mess with debuggers. That's a common technique see quite often with malware. There's kind of tons of techniques out there, actually. There's this is one of the best references that I found. It's a 147-page PDF, ultimate anti-debugging reference. So just kind of going through and understanding a lot of the different techniques. There's a few of them though that are most common that we're just going to talk about here, but there's tons of them. So one of them is basically just using the Windows API. So is debugger present? That's the one that I see all the time. So when that function is called, it's just going to return a non-zero if the current process is running in a debugger. There's some other APIs as well that check basically the same thing. So this is a screenshot of IDaPro here. And you can see the call to is debugger present. I don't know, can you guys see that? Is it too small or? Okay. And then also just looking at assembly, you see like the hexabytes on the left. If you haven't looked at this stuff before, those actually are translated in the assembly to the operand mnemonic, like the move, push, call, all those. So we're calling is debugger, or this malware is calling is debugger present. And then that gets returned in EAX, and then it's putting that into a variable. And then farther down, near the bottom, right before it's about to jump, there's a comparison with that, with 0, checking to see if it's 0. And then we're either going to jump, and then at the bottom, you can see they're closing the process, or we're going to go and do whatever bad things we had in mind. And then this is also the decompiled version. Hit the F5 cheat button, and you can just see the exact same thing. It's doing, we're calling is debugger present, then it's checking it's true, and then it's going to run the program if it's not true, and then otherwise we're going to die. So what those APIs are actually doing, they're checking the process environment block, the PEB block, as it's commonly called. So I have the structure up there in the top left showing what's laid out. So 2 bytes in, the being debugged. That's what they're really interested in checking to see if this is actually being run in a debugger. And then here's an example in the assembly. You can access that structure using the FS30H. And then they're moving that into EAX, and then they're accessing 2 bytes in, and then moving that into EBX, and then testing, and then jumping whether or not that's true. So the other main anti-debugging technique is timing checks. So the time it takes, as you guys saw in that video, Xylitol was running through, it takes a lot longer to debug a program. You're constantly hitting the F key, jumping to the next instruction. So the time to debug it is going to be way more than the time it's going to take to actually run it. So some malware will actually check for this. There's an instruction RDTSC, and that's just going to give you it's going to return the ticks since the reboot, and that's going to be stored in EDX, EAX. And then it'll run that check again later, and if that's greater than a certain amount, then it has a fairly good idea that it's being run in a debugger. There's also a Windows API, get tick count is another one. that they could run early on, check it, and then later on check it again, and if it's too big, there's something fishy going on. So this is kind of a fun one. I don't see it as much anymore. Thread local storage, commonly called TLS callbacks. This is just another way to start a program. There's another section called the TLS callback, and many debuggers will start on the entry point, or stop on the entry point when you load it, and you actually have to go into the settings and make it stop earlier on at the TLS callback. So that's another reason to run it in a VM in a safe environment, because you may be running it in a debugger and you think that you're fine, you're safe, and then there's a TLS callback and your debugger's not going to stop for that, and all of a sudden the malware's running and you didn't catch it. That happened to me before playing around with stuff. I think a class I took, we had that too. It's kind of funny. But so how do we bypass anti-debugging? Easiest way nowadays is just using a plugin. There's common plugins for any debugger that you pretty much will be using. Debug, there's Ollie Advanced, Hide Debugger plugin, I think it's called. And then in IDA Pro, there's IDA Stealth. Then you just basically check all the things, and it'll tell the process that basically things that would make it seem like it's not being debugged. So, or if you wanted to, you could manually patch the program as you're going through. So the next technique, anti-disassembly. These are just techniques to make disassemblers mess up. Every disassembler kind of has to make assumptions on the code, on what you're getting, in order to display the mnemonics from, it's basically just getting hex bytes, and those can be variable offset, variable length. There's no real structure to it that it has to be. So the assembler, as it goes through, it has to make assumptions on what it thinks this code actually is. There's two types of disassemblers. There's a linear. So that's just like when you're on a Linux terminal and you use object dump. That's just going like in a dumb way, just like straight through the hex bytes, and just like these hex bytes equal this operand with this. These hex bytes equal this, and just going straight through from beginning to end. And then there's recursive traversal, and that's like IDA Pro. That's intelligently going over the program and discovering what code it should disassemble, what mnemonic it should do, and if it even should disassemble certain parts. So those are the two parts. Obviously, we want recursive traversal. It's a lot harder to fool, but as we'll see here, there's even some ways to mess with that. So this example is particularly kind of a good one, kind of an evil one from Nick Harbour. He's got an awesome presentation there on Vimeo he did for Nova Hackers a little while back. It's really good. He covers a lot of these techniques. So this one, we're starting off those bytes on the top. It just looks like a move instruction, and then an EAX, and then there's a short jump, -7. So that's always going to be true as well, because you're XORing EAX, the 0 flag. And then, so you're going to jump 7 bytes back. So it's almost like an unconditional jump, but it looks conditional almost. So you're jumping 7 bytes back, actually in the middle of that instruction, the move instruction there. And then EB05, you're actually jumping 5 bytes ahead to the real code, but there's that E8 there, and the disassembler is going to start with that, and it's going to be confused as it goes through and tries to disassemble. So how we bypass this is just, you need an interactive disassembler like IDA Pro. And you can actually redefine certain code blocks. You can hit the U button, that does an undefined. D turns something into data, and then C, an important one. You can turn something into code that you want to change to code. This is an example of Shiva Anti-Reverse Engineering. It's from the IDA Pro book. It's a really great reference on this topic. But we can see at the beginning, there's a call instruction going to whatever, and then D6 plus 1. And then you see the next instruction, D6, but you're actually going plus 1 into that instruction. So the disassembler doesn't really know, what's going on there. So what we need to do is, at that D6 instruction, you can undefine, and then at the place where you're calling to, change that to code. And we can see we have some more instructions to go with. So we have pop, load effective address, and then going down. And then now we have another jump to DB plus 1 there. So you can see there's another instruction right below there, DB, but you're actually going 1 byte past that. So we need to do another undefine. It's just kind of showing undefining that and then redefining that as code. And then now we have a jump EAX. So that's another thing, is now we're jumping to a location, but we don't know what EAX is unless we're backtracking through the program and seeing what EAX was set to. That's just a register in assembly. Or we can run it in Debugger, and we'll see what EAX is and know, where we're going from there. So that first initial example I showed with the assembly kind of all messed up, that's actually implemented in a tool that Nick Harbour wrote called PE Scrambler, and that's implemented in this Veil framework, and that's kind of just a tool. A lot of pen testers probably use this more. You can generate Metasploit payloads that bypass AV and make things a lot more difficult to analyze. So that was an example of some of the anti-disassembly that PE Scrambler does. It does some other things too that just make it pretty difficult to look at. So it's just out there if you guys are looking for something to play with ever. We're getting into obfuscation. This is basically just obscuring programs to make them more difficult to analyze. This can be as easy as simple substitutions, XOR, Caesar, base64. See those all the time just because probably they don't take up a lot of resources for a malware author to use, and then they still obfuscate things and make it a little more difficult. And then also you can use real cryptography, but then you're going to have to import all that stuff. Real cryptography takes a lot to do it. So, and then custom encoding is probably the worst of all of them, using several of these operations, because there's nothing common out. Like base64, you can easily decode that just using any kind of base64 decoder, but if it's something custom, you actually have to reverse engineer to see what they're messing with and changing in order to get that. And then also just inserting a bunch of junk code just to make it harder to look at. Here's an example just showing simple XOR encoding. It's probably kind of small for you guys. So just they're jumping through, and then you can see I have it circled there in the bottom left. There's just XOR. XOR is used quite a bit to zero out certain registers and things, like XOR, EAX, EAX. But if you see it used and then there's like a key or something different, it's commonly something probably interesting. So here it's being XORed with a key, EAX there, and then you can see the decompiled version up there. It's a little easier to see the XOR operation with that key. So they're just, you can see the string in the binary. If you just pull up strings, usually you can see all kinds of interesting things, but if they do something like this, you pull it up, it's just going to look like garbage until you actually reverse it and see what they're changing that to. So cryptography, there's a couple of really good plugins for IDA Pro. IDAscope, FindCrypt2, those will actually go through and locate. Cryptography requires certain constants, and it'll go through and find those for you and highlight them. So if you're looking for a section maybe that's doing some cryptography, that could be helpful. And then entropy as well. IDA entropy is a plugin. There's lots of other ones out there that can calculate the entropy. I think even Yara has that built into some math operations that it has now. So basically, the higher the number in entropy, the more random it is. So the more random it is, the more likely it's either packed or encrypted. Encryption is very random, right? So the lower number, maybe it's not encrypted or packed, but higher probably is. So then moving into packers. So all these different techniques we've talked about so far, the anti-virtualization, anti-debugging, all that, a lot of those can be brought together all in packers. They'll combine multiple versions of these techniques, and then also they'll be used to shrink the malware. It also makes it more difficult to detect because you're not just looking at the underlying binary there. They're messing with it basically to try to make it harder to find. Makes analysis more difficult for us when we're trying to look at them. And then, yeah, as we said, kind of combining multiple techniques. And this is a picture of a cat here, like those. Have you guys seen those like Russian nesting dolls, Matryoshka or whatever? So it's kind of like that with the cats, right? You're pulling one off, there's another one below it, and you keep going one lower. That's kind of what you're doing. You're embedding an executable in there, and then it's going to unpack it, and oh, then here's the real one from there. So in that same study done by these guys there, they found that 65% of samples were not packed, while 34% were, so it's quite a bit. There's tons of different packers out there. They're pretty easy to find. From this graphic by Angie Albertini, UPX is probably by far the most common. And then you get all the way into, there's a lot harder ones like Armadillo, or like probably some of the hardest packers, VM Protect and Themida. They actually like virtualize the instructions, so it's actually interpreting like virtualized instructions that you have to figure out. So that can be pretty tricky. Some of the top packers, as we said, UPX, Armadillo. In this sample that they did, Armadillo was up there. Some of the other ones, maybe not as hard. As we can see, UPX is pretty easy here to unpack and show. And this is just kind of highlighting some of what we said. Another infographic here about how packers are going to combine a lot of different techniques. So we got a compressor part of it that could compress the malware to make it smaller. When you're transferring over the network, you want it to be small so that you can download fast and get what they need to get done. And then the protection, anti-debugging, anti-emulation, all that fun stuff. And then a crypter, messing with it, encrypting, encoding. And then a bundler for like dropping or injecting other files. And then the virtualizer, that's kind of the more advanced protectors that we see there. And then a mutator, that's more for messing with the file, like the polymorphic, metamorphic type stuff, that making it difficult to detect, basically, kind of changing it a lot. It's just showing some of the different kind of functions as it goes down to unpack. You can see kind of from more of a simple to more of an advanced level here. Basically starting out, you're basically unpacking, decrypting, and then you're going to jump to that entry point of the actual program. UPX is the easiest. It's by far the commonly most used that I've seen, and it's really easy to unpack actually, but then basically it just makes it so you can't see the binary just sitting on disk by itself as easily, just looking at strings or whatever. But so -D will actually decompress it. Sometimes they might mess with it so that this doesn't work, just using the basic way to unpack it, but it's very easy just to find where it jumps to the actual start of the unpack program. So also if you get some sort of packer that you haven't seen before, kind of something I try a lot of times the first time is just doing a Google search for that packer and then the specific version and then trying to see if there's something out there to unpack it. So there might be one out there that's worth trying. This is one, G Unpacker. It's got quite a few different ones out there that you can try with. You might have varying success here or there, but if it only takes a couple minutes and it might save you a little bit of time, it might be worth just giving a try at it. So there's also a cheat code here for dealing with some hard-to-pack malware, like Themida or VM Protect. Some of those can be kind of a stinker and a little bit difficult to unpack. So also you might not necessarily even need to do that because, depending on what you're trying to do. So it could be a big investment to try to do that and you might not need to. So you might be able to just get what you need. The malware at some point it has to run, right? In order to run, it has to be in memory basically at some point running and sitting there. So you might be able to get what we need. So memory collection, might be given like a memory dump or something, but if you're collecting it, if it's a VM, it's super easy, right? There's you just suspend the VM and then grab that file out of the directory. Also, there's other files you can get if there's a crash or the hibernation file. And then by far the most common is just running it in software. This is my favorite, Moonsouls dump it. It's just like a command line tool. You just run it, it'll dump all the memory for you. Pretty simple, easy. This is a screenshot from Art of Memory Forensics. It highlights a lot of the different ways to collect memory there. So, and then we got this memory dump. What are we going to look at it? You guys have probably all heard of volatility. It's got like tons of plugins here. As you can see, we got like the knife guys, like, and you buy this, and you get this, and this, and this. I love watching those guys like late at night. I don't know if they're still on, but I used to watch them. So tons of functions to do, or plugins with volatility, and there's more. There's a contest every year. So earlier we saw that dark comment example that Xylitol did, where you unpacked that configuration in memory. Here's another example, just getting a memory dump and just dumping the process that looks suspicious. So that process, when it was running, it was like it basically had like 3 DLLs in a common or 3 L's in DLL in a common process. So it tried to look common to blend in, but it's just a little off if you're paying attention. So what we do with that was we dump it, and then just running strings against it is an easy thing, and then doing less on that and grepping for dark, and you're able to see the configuration there just from the strings running in memory. So we bypassed the memory, or bypassed the armor, I guess I should say. Now what are we going to do now? So we got actually the piece of malware that we're going to look at. What is our goal here? Keep that in mind. Don't get lost in the weeds when reversing a malware sample. It's not often needed to know about every single little function that the malware is doing, but kind of focusing in on some key areas that are interesting to you. So if we wanted like to create network indicators, say we had some malware that triggered an incident or whatever, and we wanted to look at it to see what it was doing on the network, because we had a good way to detect something on the network. Maybe we'd look for domains, IP addresses, ports, protocols, HTTP headers, content, all that stuff. But how we would zero in on that is looking at the different APIs and when they're used. So those are some of the common ones, like a socket, connect, bind, listen, send, and then win INet, common one. All those functions going out. A lot of times malware will go over HTTP because it blends in. If in all of our environments there's tons of HTTP traffic, right? HTTPS traffic, probably even harder because then it's encrypted, but tons of HTTP traffic, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack sometimes. So they'll beacon out over HTTP with some sort of something in the URI string to key in on maybe, or domains that it's reaching out to. So some of those like HTTP open requests, send requests, and then actually reading the file when it gets back. So, like it might beacon out to say, what do you want me to do over HTTP? It'll get something back. It's going to read that. And then those might be some really interesting places to key in on if you're looking for a network indicator. If you're looking for like a host-based indicator, Yara's like super awesome for this. Their little tagline is pattern matching Swiss knife. So this is just a Yara signature looking at a point of sale malware. You can put metadata in the signature, like to say what the malware was or what you wanted to track. And then also, and then you're going to have some strings that you're going to match on. So Yara, you can feed it files, PCAPs, whatever, and it'll basically search over the file really efficiently and fast and try to find whatever it is you're looking for. So for this one, I defined 3 strings that are there. They left the debugging symbols in this malware, so it's kind of a good thing to key in on. And then the condition. Also with those strings, you want to make sure that they're long enough so that basically for efficiency, if you have a really short string, Yara is going to match that really short string more. So if you have a long enough string, it's more efficient. And you also want it to be unique as well. So P Studio has those blacklisted strings and things. Those might be good ones to key in on to look at, because it also will compare against, or I guess that's another tool we'll get into. But and then the condition, the uint 16.0, and that's actually the beginning of an executable the 5A4D right there. So that'll only match if the file is an executable, so it won't trigger on anything else that has those strings in there. And then also, the file size is less than 500K. That also helps with speed. If you have a big file, it's not going to have to go through all that because malware a lot of times is going to be smaller. So just how many samples you are, just try to match the file size as well as the header helps. And then it's going to match one of those strings. I'll trigger on some documentation there. So kind of here in conclusion. As you can see, malware analysis can be kind of fun. It's like a puzzle. It's like a game, right? They make something and try to hide it, and then we get to try to reverse it and figure out what it does. Kind of a cat and mouse game. Constantly, there's new techniques being discovered and created, and then we're figuring out ways to bypass them. Tons of different techniques, and once you're able to bypass that armor, then we're able to get these indicators, we've been talking about. And then lastly, just like a few little security strategies that I like to kind of share when I talk that I think these ones actually work. I have a few memes with them, but there's a lot of different things we can be doing in security, but these memes kind of at least focus on some of the techniques I think that work and are good. So whitelist all the things. It's kind of a popular thing that's growing, but so even in application security, actually whitelisting what you want instead of just looking for bad stuff. It's a really effective strategy. With application security, with programs, whitelisting, what you actually want to run is a lot easier than just trying to find bad. And then also on the network as well, whitelist. It takes a lot of work to get to that, but it's philosophically, it's so much more effective of a technique just to allow known good, because you're only allowing what you think is good. So that's one. And then segmenting all the things. We see a lot of breaches recently and things, and where it's the whole environment just got totally owned from one thing. So kind of segmenting your environment, that's hard work too, right? But that's a really effective way. So things are going to get hacked. We all know that. But then trying to limit the exposure from there so that then you can detect all the things. So if you do have it segmented and then maybe an attacker's trying to pivot, actually having people looking at logs, looking at network traffic, trying to detect the traffic is good. These are some references, and like I said, I'll put these up online. Yes. Any questions at all from anybody or anything? Yeah.
What would you recommend for a place to go learning
how to play with malware? Sure. I have actually a resources section up on my website, tylerhalfpop.com, just for that. So I detail out all kinds of different tools you can look at, and then some books. Practical Malware Analysis is a great book. Mike Sikorsky, it's a good place. Malware Analyst Cookbook is another good one. I'd say, start with maybe those two. They have lots of labs built into them as well. And then I have some of the tools I listed here are kind of the 20% that are going to give you the 80% return. So really knowing these tools, and then I have a few other ones listed on my website. That would be helpful. And then also, the way that's been the most helpful for me, honestly, is actually just doing it and diving in. Because you read about it in a book, it's like anything. Right? I mean, we read about it, but then once we actually dive in and start doing it, that's why CTF and actually doing stuff like that. And certifications that require you to actually do something are so much more beneficial than just reading and multiple choice. So there's some sites out there, I have those listed on my site too, as well, where you can download live malware. And then also there's some challenges like doing crackmes.de. They have little challenges that reverse engineers will make to kind of to hide a key in there or something, or basically to defeat a copyright mechanism or something that they invent, like a key generator kind of thing. So those are really good ways to just dive in and start playing with it. IDA Pro has a community version as well that you can use. It's kind of expensive, unfortunately, but there's other ones like Hopper that runs on Mac and Linux that has the ability to do some decompiling as well, which is nice, and then it's coming a long way. So, yeah. So I'd say those ways, those kind of places are the best place to dive in and just jump in. Yeah, it's fun. So, you know, be kind of want to pull your hair out sometimes. But good, cool. What's up?
What's the best antivirus?
Best antivirus. I'm being trolled. Honestly, though, that question, like a lot of people like really dog on antivirus, and it's true. You can bypass it pretty easily, right? Like a lot of pen testers will show talks. I mean, using that Veil framework or just using some simple Python, it's really easy to bypass AV. But a lot of them are pretty similar. There's probably some ratings out there I think I've seen that show maybe ones that maybe catch more stuff. But I think it still will catch a lot of the generic stuff. I think Microsoft actually did do a study, maybe on showing, computers that don't have any antivirus and then ones that do. At least you're going to catch your grandma clicking on some generic stock Trojan. You're not going to catch somebody that actually knows what they're doing, right, with just antivirus. So, yeah. It's a good one. Thanks. Anybody else? Anything? Or? Cool. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys coming, sitting through. I know sometimes looking at stuff maybe can be boring, so thanks.